back to analysis. Last Saturday, Amnesty International and the Tamil community in London held two separate protests in Parliament Square against Sri Lanka's hosting of the meeting of Commonwealth leaders in Colombo. Amnesty protesters dressed as Grim Reapers to highlight the deaths of 40,000 Sri Lankans during the country's civil war. The campaigners said that the 15th of November meeting of Commonwealth leaders, hosted by Sri Lanka, should be an opportunity to address the country's human rights abuses, something that is actually not on the agenda. The Commonwealth Secretary, Kamalesh Sharma, defended the choice of Sri Lanka as a country in which to hold the biennial meeting by saying that the organisation's strength is engagement, and the gathering would further efforts to improve human rights in the country. Well, in the studio with me to discuss whether the UK should boycott the Commonwealth Summit are Raj Vakesan, Advocacy Coordinator of the British Tamils Forum, Alex Wilkes, Senior Programme Lawyer at the International Bar Association, and on Skype we have Emmanuel Stokes, a freelance journalist. But first, here's Tiana Simons with more.
It has been just 4 years since Sri Lanka's bloody civil war came to an end. Next week, the world's spotlight will shine on Sri Lanka for a very different reason, as over 50 heads of state come together for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. However, there has been widespread condemnation of the Commonwealth's choice of host due to Sri Lanka's highly questionable human rights record, led by President Raj Vakesan. Protests have erupted in India, whilst Canada have already confirmed that their Prime Minister will not be attending. An estimated 40,000 Tamil civilians were killed in the final months of the civil war, trapped in government-created no-fire zones, used as human shields by the rebel Tamil Tigers. In London, thousands, led by the British Tamil Forum, took to the streets on Saturday, calling for a UK boycott. Amongst them were victims of the war.
During the last war in 2009, I was trapped in the war zone. The Sri Lankan government was bombarding the civilians' areas without any discrimination. They used chemical weapons, they used cluster bombs, and we were injured. We were being displaced. We were running everywhere. They didn't even give any excuse for civilian targets. They were bombing everywhere indiscriminately, and I was injured as well, and I've been trapped in the war. I've seen all this death and this disaster. So I was a victim, and I was there in 2009.
Meanwhile, a demonstration by Amnesty called on Cameron to use the meeting as an opportunity to address Sri Lanka's human rights record. In polar opposition to the Commonwealth's commitment to human rights, democracy and rule of law, recent evidence of crimes against Tamils includes systematic murder by the military, sexual violence and indiscriminate targeting of civilians.
You know, the UK itself calling for an independent investigation into war crime. They accept that what happened in 2009 in Sri Lanka is a war crime and crime against humanity. The Tamil community will feel that what's happening to Tamils is genocide. And even after the war ended in 2009, there's no progress for the Tamils, and Tamils still live under military occupation in the north and east, and the human rights record is really bad. I mean, the Sri Lanka breached all the Commonwealth values, and it's not a country to host the important meeting for the Commonwealth.
Alongside concerns for human rights, there's also been widespread suggestion of suppression of press freedom. This Tamil journalist is one who fears persecution in his own country.
They kill so many journalists, Sivaram and even the Sinhala journalists, they killed because they are telling the truth. The truth is our side. Truth is, over the 50 years, 60 years, we are agitating for our rights.
Despite criticism, David Cameron has said he will be at the meeting in Colombo next week, alongside His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales. But whether the Prime Minister will use it as a platform as promised is another question. Tiana Simons, Islam Channel.
Well, Raj Vakesan, we saw you there on the video clip arguing for the boycott of the summit next week in Colombo. I mean, your line is not actually getting through. Practically every Commonwealth leader is going. I mean, you failed.
Yeah, the leaders of the Commonwealth, they are with Sri Lanka because for that reason is that Kamalesh Sharma is very strong, and then he's pushing all the leaders to, go to Sri Lanka. As a British Tamils Forum, representing the Tamils in the UK, we are strong on our call. We are calling our Prime Minister not to go to Sri Lanka for two reasons. That Sri Lanka have made several promises, including a meaningful reconciliation after ending that war in 2009. They will have a meaningful political solution to accommodating Tamils and all ethnic groups in Sri Lanka. They have failed on that. You have seen this. People have seen the Channel 4 documentary, and the UN resolution has come out. They all stated that Sri Lanka have committed war crime and crime against humanity. And the Tamil community, we believe that what's happening to Tamils in Sri Lanka is ongoing structural genocide. So for that two reasons, I mean, we don't want the Prime Minister to go. They're saying that engaging with Sri Lanka, going to Sri Lanka and having a say while the Commonwealth is taking place is much better than the message given from the UK not going to Sri Lanka. But we disagree on that. We say that the strongest message you can give to Sri Lanka is not go to Chogam, and that's what all the Prime Ministers, all the leaders of the country, Commonwealth leaders should do, like the Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper.
Well, the Queen has announced, or did announce some months ago, that Buckingham Palace announced that the Queen would not be going. Do you think she agrees with you? Is that why she's going? Is she boycotting?
We feel that's the case because the Queen never missed any of the Commonwealth. Queen signed the Commonwealth Charter in March 2013, and she never missed any of the Commonwealth meetings apart from one. Queen also travelled to New Zealand last month. So the reason they're given that Queen won't be able to travel to Sri Lanka is too far. But we don't accept that. Queen is quite healthy enough to travel to New Zealand. It's almost double the distance than Sri Lanka. So, we thank the Queen, and I think that, our Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary should also follow that. As you know, that we have done several protests. We have done lots of engagement with the government, and they have not given for the right reason to be in Sri Lanka, apart from they want to protect the Commonwealth. But engaging with Sri Lanka has not delivered since the war ended in 2009. It's been over 4 years, and we have resolution in the Human Rights Council and the Human Rights Commission. And Avi Pillai visited Sri Lanka, and she said that Sri Lanka is turning a more authoritarian regime.
Well, let's deal with that point in a minute. Let's stick to the issue of boycott or engagement. Yeah. Let me ask you, Alex Wilkes. You were supposed to be going with a delegation of British lawyers to Colombo earlier in the year, or at the end of last year, and then the impeachment of the Chief Justice happened and you were banned from entering. So does that mean you also now support the idea of a boycott?
No, it doesn't. We are obviously deeply concerned at the human rights situation and also the situation of the independence of judges and lawyers. However, we don't think that isolating Sri Lanka will necessarily improve the human rights situation, and the UK plays obviously a unique role in the Commonwealth. Apart from anything else, it's the primary funder of the Commonwealth. So we really think that in order for it to deliver the message, it really needs to be there.
But what is the message? That they have to improve their human rights?
That they have
or
to,
else? I mean,
they have to.
Well,
there are a number of concrete steps that I think can be taken. Firstly, David Cameron recently said to Aung San Suu Kyi that he would be having very tough discussions with the Sri Lankan government, and that, importantly, he would be meeting with all political parties. And I think that's very, very important. He will be visiting Jaffna, and he'll be reaching out to all sides. Secondly, next week, there will be a meeting during CHOGM of the Commonwealth Ministerial Action Group, which will investigate breaches of the Harare Declaration, which sets out the core values, Commonwealth values of human rights, democracy and the rule of law. It's not too late, and it's a long shot, but the possibility does exist for pressure to be put on Sri Lanka not to assume the chair in office of the Commonwealth for the next 2 years.
So in other words, you mean they would have the summit, but then they wouldn't allow Sri Lanka to remain as chair for the next 2 years?
If they consider that there was a sufficient breach of the Harare Declaration.
Has that ever happened before with another country?
No, that hasn't, but there's always a first time. There's also another point that I'd like to make in terms of concrete steps, and that's really the issue is also with the Commonwealth as an organisation. It was never set up as a human rights monitoring body. Now, a few years ago, a group of eminent persons, of senior Commonwealth jurists, put forward a series of recommendations for reform of the Commonwealth, and one of those key recommendations was not adopted, and that was with respect to the creation of a Commissioner for Human Rights who has meaningful monitoring and investigatory powers in Commonwealth countries. And we think this would be an ideal opportunity for the UK to bring that up during CHOGM.
Well, Emmanuel Stokes, let me turn to you. I mean, what is the relevance of the Commonwealth nowadays if they can't even take a firm stand on something like human rights in one of their member countries?
Well, that's something that's been questioned, actually, if I heard you right, because the sound went a bit funny for me there. Yeah, there have been articles released, for example, in The Independent recently, where they've been questioning the relevance of the Commonwealth in terms of its ability to influence these key aspects of the whole body, which are affirmed in its charter, which is commitment to good governance, human rights, democracy, and so on. And in all those areas, Sri Lanka is actually an example to the world about how not to behave. And I think the point that was made just now by the previous speaker is very interesting, because what it brings up is the issue of efficacy, whether or not you can have an impact. And that's purely about practical considerations, strategic considerations, about how to make a difference. And I really do appreciate that argument. However, to me, we've had 4 years. And if I could be a little bit emotional about it, I suppose, from a sort of less of a sort of legal or technical point of view, you have, I think, now incontrovertible evidence of absolutely appalling, intentional crimes against humanity. You've got the satellite images of the shelling of the no-fly zone. You've got even Gotabaya Rajapaksa himself in an interview with Sky News admitting that hospitals are legitimate targets. And according to Human Rights Watch, hospitals were targeted over 30 times. Some of them who gave the GPS coordinates were targeted within hours or days, and those that did not were not targeted. All of this is very compelling evidence, and there's far more than that. And with all of this, and in the face of so much pressure from the UN, from Amnesty International, from international journalists and so on, the government has managed to slime its way out of any accountability. And I think the trouble is the danger is that the Commonwealth is letting itself down, because for the next 2 years, the face of the Commonwealth is going to be Rajapaksa and his regime. And they are everything that the Charter says, that says it's committed to. They're everything, that's kind of opposite to that.
No, but Alex Wilkes made the point that it's still possible for them to say, even though we're having the summit in your country, Mr. Rajapaksa, unfortunately, we're not having you as chairman for the next 2 years. They could do that.
Yeah, it's a possibility, and that's all it is. And that's why, it doesn't send enough of a message. There's this hope that they'll get there, but, the regime will obviously resist it, as they've resisted any sort of accountability measures before. As much as possible, they've resisted an international investigation under extreme pressure, and even with India turning against them. So I don't know. I mean, maybe that will get somewhere. If it does, my hat's off to the people who are behind that. But the thing is, the bigger message, there'll be far more impact if Britain joined Canada. And instead of Sri Lanka being isolated, it's Canada being isolated right now. But if the UK joined Canada and said, no, we're not going to attend, that will put the heat back on Sri Lanka to do.
Well, Alex, let me come to you.
It's international.
I just want to ask. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to ask Alex to come back in on this point. You said that they may set up some new commissioner for human rights, but that's yet another mechanism. Mm-hmm. There is the issue of whether or not they hold an inquiry into the last weeks of the war that finished 4 years ago. Do you think the Commonwealth leaders will say, we believe there should be an inquiry?
I don't think, it's not really within the mandate of the Commonwealth. As I mentioned before, the Commonwealth was never really set up as an investigatory mechanism. That's a matter for
they should do the investigation, but that there should be an international investigation of the...
Well, as the UN has called for an investigation, absolutely, they can endorse the calls of the UN.
You think that would be helpful?
Absolutely.
Well, how serious is the situation now? Let's just put to one side, if one can, the atrocities and the allegations about the end of the war. What is it like now for journalists, lawyers, for ordinary Tamils living in the north of Sri Lanka to live?
Yeah, let me talk about the Tamils, how they feel at the moment. Just take the last election in the north. The Tamils, the Sri Lankan government telling the world that this war is over. There's a lot of progress on the ground. They're developing the north and east. The Tamils don't see that way. Last election, the Tamils voted for the Tamil party, not the government. Since the war ended, the violence, it was always directed towards Tamils, now shifted towards Tamil Muslims. I can tell you over 10 incidents against Tamil Muslims. The Tamil mosques being destroyed. You know, Sri Lanka is a multi-religious country, and they are changing that multi-religious, the pluralistic community of the nation into a mono-ethnic Buddhist state. That's the agenda that Sri Lanka wants to have. I mean, that's what's happening. Just take a look at the north, how the Sri Lankan government is having large military in the north and east. There's one military personnel for every 3 Tamil residents in the north. They are colonizing the north and east. There's a demographic change. They want to destroy the defined Tamil territories of the north and east and the Tamil homeland. The situation after the war ended is much worse. The people who are living in the camp, they're no longer in the camps, but they are still living under tarpaulin and under the trees, and they don't have any anyone helping them directly to
Isn't
rehabilitate.
international aid going in to help on reconstruction?
Well, the government wants to direct all the international help to infrastructure project, building roads, while people living under the trees and don't have sufficient medical support and educational need, and they've gone through 30 years of war, and they have mentally disturbed, mentally having impact of the war. They have not been counselling happening for those people.
But we are hearing, sorry to interrupt, we are hearing that David Cameron will go to Jaffna. Do you think he will actually be able to talk to people freely, and therefore isn't it quite a good thing he's going to Sri Lanka? He'll get some impression himself.
There are several other leaders been to North and East after the war ended. They always go to the area or place that the Sri Lankan government feels that's good to have international leaders. They haven't been to the villages, the people who are suffering. You know, after the leaders leave, and the Tamils who live there, they fear. You know,
but
people won't come out.
Can he meet Tamils in a relatively free atmosphere, not just people who support the government?
The problem is that the people, if there's no witness protection for those people to come out and speak out, and after the leaders leave, they have to live in that country. They fear that after David Cameron or any other leader go and speak to them, they leave the country, they will be taken away and disappear. So they will not come and tell the truth. You know, this was the experience Navi Pillai had when she was in Sri Lanka. You know, she spoke to a few Tamils, and after she left, and the Sri Lankan intelligence went there and questioning them and taking them away. You know, unless the international community established an international independent investigation, the impunity is been going on for the past 60 years since Sri Lankan independence. It won't change. It will not bring justice to those victims.
Well, what's your view? Do you see any light at the end of this tunnel?
Well, I think there needs to be serious political will in Sri Lanka, and unfortunately I don't think we're seeing that. I think, in fact, we're seeing the opposite. What we've witnessed since 2009, where there was a real window for political reconciliation, we've seen the opposite, and we've seen a systematic dismantling of the separation of powers, of the checks and balances within the Sri Lankan state, and also ongoing violations against Tamil groups and also other minorities. So this is exactly where international organisations like the Commonwealth need to be creative in how they apply pressure on Sri Lanka, and also I think what it does is that it begs wider questions as to the relevance of the Commonwealth in today's world.
Emmanuel Stokes, let me ask you. I mean, often in advance of international meetings, a particular government tries to sort of clean up its act, as it were, and sort of put its best face forward and to try and pretend that the situation's been exaggerated in a negative way by critics, etc. Do you see any sign that in the run-up to this Commonwealth summit there has been some kind of improvement of human rights in Sri Lanka?
No, none at all, actually, as far as I can tell. And there's been a continuation of this abject denialism from the government where they're imputing that, the No-Fire Zone documentary, which came out recently, and other reports and criticisms are all, the product of some international conspiracy by people who are in the pay of the Tamil Tigers and so on. I'm sure that they'll try and put on, a good show, as it were, to the international community, but to me, very little has changed. And I think the question for the Commonwealth is fundamentally, why would it suspend a country like Fiji, which had a military coup, which is bad enough, but not a country like Sri Lanka, which is now going to have the prestigious position of hosting the CHOGM and then being potentially the leader of the Commonwealth for 2 years, which has committed, far worse crimes and continues to commit serious human rights violations.
Well, isn't the problem that the suspension mechanism comes into force if there's a military coup? But there isn't a military coup in Sri Lanka. It is still a parliamentary democracy with regular elections and opposition parties and so on. So
yes, and that's a key point. That's a key point about the failings of the mechanisms within the Commonwealth in order to be able to punish far more serious wrongdoing than simply military coups. I mean, military coups are very bad, but look at what happened in Zimbabwe. That was in response to human rights violations too, as far as I understand it, and that it's still not quite as serious as what's happened in Sri Lanka. So there is an element, that raises the question whether or not the Commonwealth's human rights response and its mechanisms are fit for purpose in terms of really advancing its own values, its own stated values, as you can see in the Charter.
And what do you think will happen after the summit? Do you think it will get better or worse?
I just think there's been a strong line of continuity in terms of human rights abuses, that's been going on since the beginning of the Rajapaksa administration, from the things that happened in Trincomalee in 2006 and so on. And I think there'll be an attempt to continue to consolidate the increasingly authoritarian power of the government, and what comes with that is inevitably human rights abuses and an erosion of the power of civil society and all the things that are meant to make democracy work well. And human rights are connected to that always.
Well, Raj, you mentioned that the Tamil National Alliance won the recent provincial elections in the north. And somewhat to the surprise of the government, they did very, very well indeed. Has the government reacted in any way encouragingly to that news by softening their position, would you say?
Not at all. The elected body have little power in the local election, in local provinces. The north and east province in Sri Lanka, they have the military generals, retired military generals, as governors. So literally the military runs those two provinces. So, you mentioned about Sri Lanka having election and Fiji did not have, because the military coup is bad, but Sri Lanka have elections, but it doesn't have democracy. Like having elections is part of the democracy, but it's not all about the democracy. There is no rule of law. Even the High Court level. I mean, even High Court judges being appointed by the Sri Lankan president who favour them. So you cannot expect Sri Lanka to investigate their own crimes. That all the judges and the rule of law, the Court of Justice in Sri Lanka is being controlled by the president. It's the case in the northern and eastern province election that local governments do not have police or land power. All the powers have been centralized. Since President Raj Vakesan took over, there's been constitutional amendments. The 18th Amendment is very controversial. The power is more shifted towards central.
Unfortunately, we're running out of time on that very important point. We'll have to break it off. Thank you very much indeed, Emmanuel Stokes. Thank you, Raj Vakesan. Thank you, Alex Wilkes. And thank you, of course, for listening. I'm sure we'll be coming back to the issue of the Commonwealth Summit in future weeks. Thank you for watching.